The year was 1865, and Arizona territory burned under a sky the color of rust. Heat shimmered off the desert floor, twisting the horizon until mountains looked like mirages. A lone rider moved through it, a man with a battered hat pulled low, dust caked his boots, and eyes that had seen too much. His name was Caleb Turner, though few called him that anymore. To most, he was just the drifter. He carried the look of a man worn down by years of bad luck and worse choices. His horse was lean, ribs showing through its hide, and every step kicked up a faint trail of dust that hung in the still air like smoke. Caleb's canteen swung half empty against the saddle horn, each clink a reminder of how close thirst was becoming death. The desert was quiet that morning, too quiet. No birds, no wind, just a faint rasp of the cicadas in the brittle brush. Caleb knew better than to trust silence. Silence out here meant something was watching. And then he heard it, a sound so out of place it stopped his heart mid-beat. A cry, thin, high, desperate. It came from down by the river that cut like a silver scar through the sand and rock. He pulled his horse around, spurred it down the slope, every muscle tightening as the cry came again. At the bank, he found her, a girl, no more than 12 or 13, caught in the river's current. Her dark hair whipped around her face, eyes wide with terror as the water dragged her downstream. She clung to a jutting branch, her fingers white, slipping inch by inch. Caleb didn't think. He leapt from the saddle, splashed into the current, boots filling with water, gun belt weighing him down. The river was stronger than it looked, cold and fast, battering his legs as he fought toward her. She screamed when he reached for her, kicking, struggling, as if he were the danger. "Hold still, damn it," he shouted, voice raw. Her nails raked his arm, but he locked a hand around her wrist, yanked her free of the branch, and dragged her back to shore. Both collapsed onto the muddy bank, coughing, gasping, trembling. Caleb wiped water from his eyes and looked at her properly for the first time. The girl's dress was torn, clinging to her thin frame. Around her neck hung a string of beads, bright against her soaked skin. Her eyes, dark and sharp, fixed on him with hate so fierce it startled him. And then he knew. Apache. The breath went out of him. His hand fell to the revolver at his side, instinct pulling at him like a reflex. But he didn't draw. He just stared at her, realization striking like a hammer blow. He hadn't saved a lost settler child. He dragged an Apache girl from the river. Apache, the very people who had taken everything from him years ago. Her lips moved, whispering a tongue he barely understood. One word, though, cut clear: thief. Caleb staggered back, as if the word were a bullet. He hadn't stolen her, not in the way she meant. But even he knew appearances could damn a man quicker than guilt. By the time Caleb reached the trading post with the girl, riding silent behind him on the saddle, whispers had already begun. A dozen pairs of eyes turned when he entered the yard, men leaning on rifles, women clutching their shawls tighter. The air was thick with suspicion, the smell of horses and sweat laced with a tang of fear. The post's owner, a broad-shouldered man named Whitaker, stepped out onto the porch. His gaze dropped to the girl, and his face hardened like sun-baked clay. "What in God's name you doing, Turner?" Whitaker's voice carried across the yard. Caleb opened his mouth to explain, but the girl beat him to it. She pointed at him, her small hand trembling, and spat a stream of words in Apache. Men shifted uneasily, gripping their rifles tighter. They didn't understand the language, but they didn't need to. Her face said enough. "He's taken her," someone muttered. "Stole her right off the land." A woman gasped. Another man swore under his breath. The air turned to tinder, one spark from catching flame. "No," Caleb said quickly, raising his hands. "You've got it wrong. She was in the river. I pulled her out." "Save it," Whitaker snapped. "You think any of us believe that? An Apache girl just happens to fall into your lap? You bring her here like a prize?" "I ain't looking for trouble." Caleb's voice was hard, but inside he felt the ground crumbling beneath him. The girl shrank back in the saddle, eyes darting to the men around her. She looked at him, and in that look was a mix of fear and fury that cut him deeper than their words. A rifle cocked, The metallic sound sliced through the heavy silence. "Get off that horse, Turner," a man barked. "Leave the girl." Caleb's hand hovered near his revolver. He knew what would happen if he obeyed. She'd be claimed as some settler's trophy, sold or worse. He couldn't let that happen, even if she hated him for it. "Can't do that," he said, voice low. Then the shot rang out. Splinters exploded from the hitching post beside his horse's flank. The animal reared, screaming, and Caleb slammed his heels into its sides. The horse bolted, men shouting, gunfire cracking behind them. Bullets kicked up dust at their heels as they tore through the yard and out into the open desert. "Hold on," he shouted over the thunder of hooves. The girl clung to him, not by choice but by fear, her fingers digging into his coat. They rode hard, the land flying by in a blur of rock and sand. Each crack of gunfire echoed like the past coming back to claim him. By the time the sound faded, sweat poured down his face, and the horse's sides heaved with exhaustion. Caleb slowed them to a trot, then a halt. He looked back. No one followed. Not yet, but he knew the truth. Settlers would spread word of what they'd seen. Apaches would hear it too. In one reckless stroke, he'd managed to make himself an enemy of both sides. They camped that night beneath a jagged outcrop of stone. The fire was small, more smoke than flame, its crackle a fragile shield against the dark. Caleb sat with his back to the rock, revolver resting on his knee. Across from him, the girl huddled with her knees pulled tight to her chest, eyes flashing whenever the firelight touched them. She hadn't said a word since they fled the post. Not in English, not in Apache. Just silence, heavy as the desert night. Caleb studied her, saw the bruises on her arms, the torn hem of her dress, the stubborn tilt of her chin. She was scared, but she wasn't weak. No, there was iron in her, the kind that bent but didn't break. "You don't believe me," he said finally, voice rough. "Reckon I don't blame you. Truth is, I didn't mean to take you. Didn't mean for any of this." She glared at him, lips pressed tight. "I'll get you back to your people," he went on. "That's a promise. Won't leave you to the whites. Won't keep you from your own. You have my word." For a moment, he thought she might soften, but then she spat into the dirt and turned her back. Caleb sighed, staring into the flames. He knew what she thought of him. A thief, a liar, maybe worse. And maybe she was right. He'd stolen things before, lives, hope, years he couldn't give back. But not this, not her. The night deepened. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries weaving through the silence. The girl shifted closer to the fire, her eyes darting nervously to the shadows. For all her hatred, she feared the dark more. Caleb noticed, but said nothing. His own fears were louder. Not the howls, not the desert. No, he feared what lay ahead. Because even as he sat there, trying to believe he could make things right, he heard it on the wind, a low, haunting cry, echoing across the night. Apache war cries. The girl's head snapped up, eyes wide. She looked at him then, not with hate, not with fury, but with a flicker of something else. Fear. And Caleb knew. Their trouble had only just begun. Dawn broke red over the desert, painting the sky in streaks of blood. Caleb had dozed against the rock, his revolver heavy in his hand, when the girl's sharp intake of breath snapped him awake. Her eyes were fixed on the ridge above. Shadows moved there. Men crouched low, rifles glinting in the first light. Caleb swore under his breath and shoved her down behind the outcrop. A bullet smacked stone where her head had been a heartbeat ago, spraying chips into the fire's dying embers. "Stay down," he barked. They came fast. Apache warriors, faces painted, hair bound tight. The ground trembled under their charge, war cries ripping the silence apart. Caleb's pistol roared, smoke stinging his eyes. One man fell, rolled into the dust, but the others closed a distance. The girl bolted from cover, darting between rocks. Caleb thought she was running away, but she turned, grabbed a loose stone, and hurled it with every ounce of strength. It struck a warrior's temple just as he raised his knife at Caleb. The man staggered, stunned long enough for Caleb's bullet to finish what the stone had started. Breathless, ears ringing, Caleb dragged the girl back behind cover. Her chest heaved, her eyes wild, but she wasn't looking at him with hate anymore. Not entirely. "Why'd you do it?" he gasped. She shook her head, words tumbling in Apache too quick for him to catch. But one thing was clear. She'd chosen not to let him die. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, the remaining warriors had melted into the hills, leaving only silence and blood in their wake. Caleb reloaded with shaking hands, the girl watching him, her face unreadable. Trust was still a stranger between them, but something had shifted in the dust of that dawn. The desert showed no mercy. By midday, the sun hammered down like a blacksmith's mallet, each step a punishment. Caleb's horse stumbled, ribs jutting sharp beneath its hide. The girl walked beside him, lips cracked, skin blistered. They had no trail, no map, just an endless sea of red rock and thorny brush. Coyotes followed at a distance, their yellow eyes gleaming in the heat. The air smelled of sweat, leather, and desperation. Caleb staggered, knees buckling, his canteen sloshed empty. He was ready to drop when the girl crouched by a patch of scrub. She pressed her knife into the earth, dug deep, and pulled free a gnarled root. With swift motions, she sliced it open, letting water bead along its fibers. She held it out. For a moment, Caleb just stared. Then he took it, sucking the moisture like a man reprieved from a gallows. "Thank you," he rasped. She didn't answer, just found another root and chewed it herself. But he saw her glance at him, and in that glance was no hate, only acknowledgement. Night fell hard. Coyotes circled closer, their howls sharp as knives. Caleb's revolver barked once, scattering them, but he knew they'd return. He set what little would he gather to flame, the fire small but steady. The girl sat across from him, knees drawn tight, beads glimmering in the firelight. Her face softened in the glow, less wild, more human. Caleb watched her and thought how young she really was, too young to have seen what she'd surely seen. After a long silence, he spoke. "I had a family once. Wife, son. Apache raid took them. I've been wandering ever since." Her head lifted, eyes narrowing. She whispered something sharp, voice trembling with anger. From the few words he caught, he understood enough. Settlers had killed her family too. She had bled from the same wound, just from the other side of the knife. The fire cracked between them. Two enemies, bound by grief neither had chosen. Caleb rubbed his face, voice low. Maybe we're both just ghosts walking in daylight. For the first time, her gaze lingered, not forgiving, not trusting, but seeing. The river they reached 3 days later was no gift. It roared swollen with spring melt, brown with mud and foam. Caleb knew it was death, but the land behind them was worse. Settlers' riders could be near. The Apache warriors surely hadn't given up their chase. "We cross," he said. The girl's eyes widened, fear flashing, but she nodded once. They led the horse into the water first. The current seized it, dragging it downstream. Caleb shouted, pulling hard on the reins, but the animal screamed, panicked, and went under. Saddlebags, rifle, supplies, all swept away. The girl cried out. Caleb grabbed her arm, hauling her after him into the current. Water rose to his chest, his chin, then over his head. He fought, lungs burning, salt and silt choking him. The girl's grip slipped from his hand. "No!" he roared, diving after her. The current spun him, slammed him into rocks, tore skin from his arms. He caught a flash of her beads beneath the surface, reached, fingers brushing hers. She kicked, pushed, dragged him up toward the light. They burst to the surface together, coughing, clinging to one another. She was the one pulling now, her slight frame somehow strong enough to drive them toward shore. Caleb's vision darkened at the edges, his strength spent, but she kept him afloat until they collapsed, half dead, on the muddy bank. Caleb lay gasping, staring at the sky. She rolled to her side, chest heaving, hair plastered to her face. Then she looked at him, and this time there was no fury, no hate, only relief. Before he could speak, a shadow fell over them. Boots pressed into the mud. Rifles gleamed in the setting sun. Caleb blinked to the haze and saw them, Apache warriors, rifles aimed, faces like carved stone. The girl sat up, eyes wide, words spilling from her lips in a rush of her own tongue. Caleb raised his hands slowly, water dripping from his fingers. His revolver was gone, swept downriver with a horse. The warriors closed in, silent, grim. One grabbed Caleb by the hair, yanking his head back, the knife's edge catching the last light of day. The girl shouted, pushing between them. She stood small but fierce, her voice shaking the silence, her hand pointing back at Caleb. Her words came hard, sharp, a defense born of desperation. The warriors listened. Their faces betrayed nothing. Caleb's heart hammered. When the knife finally lowered, it wasn't mercy he felt. It was a verdict delayed. Bound by their captors, Caleb and the girl were dragged into the dusk, toward a fate neither of them could yet see. The Apache camp lay in a valley ringed by stone cliffs, its fires glowing against the night like watchful eyes. Caleb was dragged through the dust, wrists bound tight with rawhide, his shoulders screaming from the rough hands that shoved him forward. The girl walked beside him, unbound, her face streaked with mud and river water, her eyes fixed on the warriors ahead. They pushed him into the center of the camp, where a circle of men stood waiting. Their faces were painted, their eyes hard as flint. Women and children gathered at the edges silent, their shadows flickering in the firelight. A tall warrior stepped forward. His chest was bare, scarred from old battles, his expression carved in stone. Caleb didn't know the name, but he knew the type: leader, judge, executioner. The man spoke, his voice low and measured. The girl answered quickly, her words tumbling over each other. She gestured toward Caleb, toward the river, then back to herself. Her small hands moved fast, painting a story in the air. The warrior's gaze shifted to Caleb. His words came sharp, but Caleb caught only fragments. Why here? Why her? I didn't take her, Caleb said, his voice steady but rough. I pulled her from the river. That's all. Laughter rippled through the crowd, bitter and sharp. One man spat into the dirt at Caleb's feet. Another called out, voice like a growl, demanding blood. The tall warrior raised a hand, silencing them. His eyes never left Caleb's. After a long pause, he spoke again, and this time his words needed no translation. Prove. Caleb frowned. Prove. The girl looked at him, her face pale in the firelight. She whispered one word in English, her voice trembling. Trial. They dragged him to the edge of the camp at dawn. The warriors lined a path between two rows of men armed with clubs, spears, and stones. The gauntlet. Caleb had heard of it, though he had never thought to face it himself. His hands were cut free, but that was no mercy. It was part of the ordeal. He would run. They would break him. If he made it through alive, perhaps they would call it honor. If not, the desert would claim what was left of him. The girl stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands clasped tight. He met her gaze once, and in her eyes he saw more than fear. He saw a plea. The first blow came the moment he moved. A club cracked across his ribs, stealing his breath. A stone split his cheek. He stumbled, blood filling his mouth, but he forced his legs forward. They beat him as he ran, voices shouting, weapons striking. His vision blurred, each step agony. He fell once, twice, and each time rose again. He thought of his wife, his boy, the fire that had taken them. He thought of the girl, her defiance, her courage at the river, and he ran. At the end of the line, he collapsed to his knees, body broken, breath ragged. The tall warrior loomed above him, spear in hand, ready to finish it. But then the girl stepped forward. Her voice cut through the noise, fierce and unyielding. She shouted at them, her words fast and sharp. She pointed at Caleb, at the blood on his face, at the bruises covering his body. Her voice broke once, but she kept going, her hands trembling as she spoke of debts, of honor, of life for life. Silence followed. Warriors glanced at each other, unreadable. The tall man lowered his spear. He looked from Caleb to the girl, then back again, his lips pressed into a hard line. Finally, he turned away, leaving Caleb alive on the ground. It wasn't mercy. It was judgment postponed. But in that moment, Caleb knew he was no longer alone. The girl had chosen him, not as captor, not as enemy, but as something else. And for the first time in years, Caleb felt the stirrings of a soul he thought long dead. Night fell heavy, the camp quiet except for crackle of fires. Caleb lay near the edge, body aching, wounds raw. The girl brought him water, her hands gentle as she pressed the gourd to his lips. He drank greedily, the coolness cutting through the pain. "Why?" he asked, voice hoarse. She tilted her head. "You saved me. Twice. I save you." It was simple to her. Life balanced against life. But Caleb knew it was more. Something bound them now, forged in fire and blood. Before he could answer, the dogs barked. A sound came down from the hills, the thunder of hooves, the crack of rifles. Settlers. The camp erupted in chaos. Women screamed. Children rushed toward the caves. Warriors seized weapons. Shots tore through the night, fire sparking where bullets struck. Caleb staggered upright, pain screaming in his body. Figures burst into the camp. Settlers, ragged men with greed in their eyes and murder in their hands. Caleb recognized one or two from Whitaker's post. They weren't here to rescue the girl. They were here to kill, to claim trophies, to spill blood for sport. The Apaches fought back, fierce and fast. The night blazed with muzzle flashes, the air thick with gun smoke and screams. Caleb's instincts roared to life. He seized a fallen rifle, braced it against his shoulder, and fired into the attackers. For the first time in his life, he fought not against the Apache, but beside them. A settler lunged at the girl, knife raised. Caleb charged, slamming his shoulder into the man, driving him back. They grappled in the dirt, fists in fury, until Caleb drove his blade into the man's chest. The settler fell still, eyes wide with shock. Blood soaked Caleb's hands, but he didn't stop. He fought like a man possessed, like every wrong of his life was being burned away in the fire that night. Warriors shouted around him, their voices a storm. The girl clung to his coat once, pulling him clear of a blow meant to kill. Together they survived, side by side, until the last of settlers lay dead or fled into the dark. Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of flames and the moans of the wounded. The camp was scarred, but it stood. Caleb dropped to his knees, chest heaving, body trembling from more than exhaustion. He felt the girl's hand on his shoulder, steady and strong. The tall warrior approached, face solemn. He studied Caleb for a long moment, then spoke words low and grave. The girl translated, her voice soft. "You free. Go. Leave. Never return." Caleb looked at her, then back at the camp. He could leave, walk away, try to find peace somewhere beyond the desert. But as he met her eyes, he knew leaving meant cutting away the only bond left that tied him to life. She touched his hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Family," she said. Caleb swallowed hard. His heart ached with the weight of the word. He rose slowly, the dawn breaking behind him, painting the camp in gold. The narrator's voice carried, soft and reflective. "Maybe a man can't outrun his past. Maybe he shouldn't try. I thought I'd taken her by mistake. But the truth was different. She took me, back from the edge, back to my own soul. And in the desert silence, I learned this. Sometimes salvation doesn't come in the shape you expect. Sometimes it comes small, fierce, and unwilling to let you die." The fire crackled, the camp stirred, and Caleb Turner, once adrift with nothing, stood a man reborn,